So once again, my partner and I will be discussing how decriminalizing drugs will detriment our country. We need to find a way to keep the use of drugs on a low scale, and decriminalizing drugs will only do the opposite. Our goal is to make sure that the drug decriminalization doesn't, our goal is to make sure that further drug decriminalization laws don't occur. We are going to do that through prohibitive drug laws, show how medical uses aren't always helpful, and by showing the effectiveness of said drug laws. So, beginning with arguments for prohibitive drug laws, I'm going to start out with an analogy, metaphor, one of those things. While concerns are sometimes expressed that the war on drugs can never be won, there is a failure to recognize that other justifiable costly policing wars, such as blitzes on speeding, can likewise never be won. Such blitzes reduce and contain speeding, as with policing of illicit drug use. Failure to police speeding drivers simply allows inordinate harm to be inflicted on other individuals. Speeding is not legalized simply because it cannot be eradicated. There is an argument that much crime and terrorism is drug-related or drug-funded, and that prohibition should reduce this. According to former U.S. President George W. Bush, when he signed the Drug-Free Communities Act reauthorization bill in December 2001, he said, "If you quit drugs, you join the fight against terror in America." According to the U.S. Office of National Drug Control Policy, drug-related offenses may include violent behavior resulting from drug effects. The U.S. Drug Enforcement Administration claims crime, violence, and drug use go hand in hand. 6 times as many homicides are committed by people under the influence of drugs as by those who are looking for money to buy drugs. Most drug crimes are committed by people trying to pay for drugs. They're committed by people on drugs. The U.S. government began the Drug Use Forecasting Program in 1987 to collect information on drug use among urban arrestees. In 1997, the National Institute of Justice expanded and re-engineered the DUF study and renamed it Arrestee Drug Abuse Monitoring, or the ADAM program. ADAM is a network of 34 research sites in the U.S. cities. DUF research indicates that frequent use of hard drugs is one of the strongest indicators of a criminal career. Offenders who use drugs are among the most serious and active criminals, engaging in both property and violent crime. Early and persistent use of cocaine or heroin in the juvenile years is an indicator of serious persistent criminal behavior in adulthood. Those arrested who are drug users are more likely than those not using drugs to be rearrested or pre-trial release or fail to appear at trial. Moving on to arguments that prohibition discourages drug use. A 2001 Australian study of 18 to 29-year-olds by the NSW Bureau of Crime Statistics and Research suggests that prohibition deters illicit drug use. 29% of those who had never used cannabis cited the illegality of the substance as their reason for never using the drug, while 90% of those who had ceased use of cannabis cited its illegality as their reason. Gil Kurlikowski, the director of the U.S. ONDCP, argues controls and prohibitions help to keep prices higher, and higher prices help to keep rates relatively low, since drug use, especially among younger people, is known to be sensitive to price. The relationship between pricing and rates of youth substance is well established with respect to alcohol and cigarette taxes. There's literature showing that increases in the price of cigarettes triggers declines in use. The DEA, or the Drug Enforcement Administration, argues that legalization has been tried before and failed miserably. Alaska's experiment with legalization in the 1970s led to the state's teens using marijuana at more than twice the rate of the other use nationally. This led Alaska's residents to vote to recriminalize marijuana in 1990. Moving on to arguments against medical uses of prohibited drugs. According to Janet D. Levy, MD, of Concerned Citizen for Drug Prevention, due to a placebo effect, a patient may erroneously believe a drug is helpful when it is not. This is especially true of addictive mind-altering drugs like marijuana. A marijuana withdrawal syndrome occurs, consisting of anxiety, depression, sleep and appetite disturbances, irritability, tremors, diaphoresis, nausea, muscle convulsions, and restlessness. The U.S. Drug Enforcement Administration also says there is growing misconception that some illegal drugs can be taken safely. For example, savvy drug dealers have learned how to market drugs like ecstasy to youth. Some in the legalization lobby even claim such drugs have medical value, despite the lack of conclusive scientific evidence. Moving on to arguments. Moving on to how drug laws are effective, supporters of prohibition claim that drug laws have a successful track record of suppressing illicit drug use since they were introduced 100 years ago. Illicit drug alcohol has current user rates as high as 80-90% in populations over 14 years of age, and tobacco has historically had current use rates up to 60% of adult populations. Yet the percentages currently using illicit drugs in OECD countries are generally below 1% of the population expecting cannabis, where most are between 3 and 10%, with 6 countries between 11 and 17%. With the advent of the counterculture movement from the late 1950s, where illicit drug use was promoted as mind-expanding and relatively harmless, illicit drug use rose sharply. According to the NIDA, with illicit drug use peaking in the 1970s in the United States, the Just Say No campaign, initiated under patronage of Nancy Reagan, coincided with recent illicit drug use decreases from 14.1% in 1979 to 5.8% in 2002, a drop of 60%. So to reiterate, our plan is to find a way to keep the abuse of drugs on a low scale and decriminalize drugs. Find a way to keep the abuse of drugs on a low scale. Our goal is to make sure that drug decriminalization doesn't exceed further. This was shown through my arguments that showed prohibitive drug laws, showed how medical uses aren't always helpful, and by showing the effectiveness of said drug laws.